listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, Greg Lynn, the former Jetstar pilot accused of killing campers Carol Clay and Russell Hill in 2020, has just had his murder conviction overturned. He was found guilty last year of murdering Clay and acquitted of Hill's death. But now in a bombshell development, the Court of Appeal has ruled there were serious irregularities in his trial, so serious they may have caused a miscarriage of justice. We'll unpack all the latest developments and what's next in just a moment. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Friday, the 12th of December. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has asked Australia's independent expenses watchdog, or IPEA, for advice on whether there should be an overhaul of MPs' taxpayer-funded travel entitlements. It follows revelations Communications Minister Annika Wells spent nearly $100,000 on last-minute flights to New York, as well as scrutiny over her family travel and use of Commonwealth cars. Ms Wells and the Prime Minister maintain all claims were within the rules as the controversy widens to other MPs. Here is the Prime Minister.
At least two members of Parliament have referred themselves for the details of their audit, but in addition to that, I've said to IPEA, please give us some advice, and we'll take that on board, and when that advice is received, we'll make a decision in the usual way, but it's important to get that advice.
The woman who was raped by Tom Silvagni has made an emotional victim impact statement in court. Silvagni is the 23-year-old son of Carlton football legend Stephen Silvagni and TV personality Joe Silvagni, and was last week found guilty on 2 counts of rape. His name has been withheld because of a suppression order which was lifted yesterday. The rape survivor delivered a 30-minute statement to the court at a pre-sentence hearing today saying, quote, "Tom Silvagni, you raped me not once but twice. You know this, I know this, and now so does everyone else. You are very much aware of what you did to me that night. It was not a mistake, it was premeditated." The Silvagni family spoke outside court saying their son continues to maintain his innocence and is now considering options to appeal. And Australians are in for one last celestial show for 2025 with the Geminid meteor shower set to peak this weekend. The annual display created by debris from an asteroid is one of the most spectacular showers of the year. The Geminids have been visible since the 4th of December and will continue until the 20th of December. But the best time to see it is Sunday night into early Monday. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on ex-pilot Greg Lynn and the Court of Criminal Appeal this week overturning his conviction for murder. With a retrial looming and the potential for key evidence to be ruled out, we unpack what is next in a case where only one person knows what really happened to campers Carol Clay and Russell Hill. Criminologist Xanthe Mallett joins us to discuss what this all means and what's next for Greg Lynn, who has always maintained his innocence. Xanthe, thanks so much for joining us. A number of sensational developments today. Can you tell us firstly, who is Greg Lynn?
Greg Lynn is an ex-Jetstar pilot who in 2020 allegedly murdered 2 older campers, Carol Clay and Russell Hill. Now, it's 2024 now, the years go quickly. He was found not guilty of murdering Russell Hill and found guilty of murdering Carol Clay. And he admitted to destroying a lot of forensic evidence and to burning the body. So that was his admittal. But he's always maintained that he did not intentionally murder anybody and that it was an awful accident and things got out of hand. So what we've just seen is a court uphold his leave to appeal his conviction for the murder of Carol Clay. And that has opened all sorts of legal minefields that we are yet to wander through.
Okay, so in regards to what's happened at the Court of Appeal, as you just mentioned, a key development on Thursday morning, the Court of Appeal President Karen Eberton has actually told the court, and I'm quoting here, there were a number of serious irregularities in the course of the trial that gave rise to a substantial miscarriage of justice. So let's go through the details here.
Yeah, so they think that there was potentially, or at least a large chance of miscarriage of justice because of the way the Crown led its case. And in essence, when questioning a couple of the witnesses, they didn't give them the opportunity to answer issues that they later raised. So they actually challenged their own ballistics evidence. And they also made commentary around Greg Lynn's evidence, that questions they hadn't put to him. So these people hadn't had the opportunity to have their right of reply. And therefore, the appeal judges have upheld that could have led to a miscarriage of justice because the jury could have been impacted by things that the Crown had said that then the witnesses didn't have the chance to challenge. So that's the problem with this case, is actually the way the Crown led it. And whilst this was actually discussed during the trial, and there were a number of times when the judge made very strident and strong commentary around what the Crown was doing and was doing, in essence, wrong, it was allowed to continue. And that decision was made jointly that it would continue. But obviously, subsequently, we've had this application for appeal, not only Carol Clay's murder, but they were seeking leave to appeal the length of sentence, which was considered manifestly too long. But that's negated now by the fact that he has been allowed to appeal the murder charge, and he will be going forward to retrial probably next year.
And just on that point, Xanthe, the 59-year-old, this Greg Lynn, is now expected to face a new trial. So what will happen in the lead up to that and this new trial?
Well, that is the $64,000 question, because we're in this incredibly unusual and odd legal situation where you have a double murder trial, a not guilty verdict on one, a guilty verdict on the other. And whilst there were some indications while the trial was ongoing that it was going to be a split decision, I expected it to go the other way. I expected him to be found guilty potentially on Russell Hill's charge and not on Carol Clay's, because of the way that the incident played out according to Greg Lynn. And that's the only survivor we have of it to kind of base our assumptions of what happened on and the forensic evidence. Now we're in a situation where the Crown and defence are going to have to go forward to committal again. That's where the evidence is presented, and the judge will decide what goes forward to trial, what is reliable, what is not prejudicial. It has to be probative, which means it has to be bringing evidence before the court that is useful but not prejudicial, not harmful, overly harmful to the accused. It has to be fair. And we're in this really odd situation where some of that evidence probably won't be led. It won't make it through that committal process, so will never be heard by a jury or even a judge alone, if that's the way this goes, in terms of the trial itself, because it relates to Russell Hill's murder, which is not being reviewed. We can't go back on and do that again. The fact he was found not guilty, that's done, that's dusted. So the evidence relating to that, how are they going to separate it from the evidence related to Carol Clay without being prejudicial? I mean, I've never seen anything quite like this, frankly.
And Xanthe, tell us, going back to this actual case, the details have been quite fascinating, and it is a mysterious situation that has captured the nation's attention.
Absolutely. I mean, we just have this seemingly random situation where a couple of campers who are kind of out in the wilderness, minding their own business, somehow come into connection with Greg Lynn. There's an altercation. One of them is shot. Carol Clay is shot at a distance, and Russell Hill is stabbed. And Greg Lynn's version of events is that this is, all an accident, has gone wrong, and Carol Clay was shot, by accident, and the gun went off, and, there was no intent on his part. Then he burnt the campsite, destroyed a lot of the evidence. He moved the bodies. He spent, frankly, a lot of time burning those bodies, which would have been an awful thing to do and terrible for the family to hear, these details as that first trial unfolded. And I don't think that's something we should forget, because those families are going to have to hear all that evidence again. They're going to have to relive this again at that trial, that second trial that will take place next year, I assume. And so he admitted that destruction of evidence. So again, in terms of Russell Hill, he will never face justice for that. And so it's this incongruity. We have this seemingly normal, safe event that turns literally deadly. And now we're back to a situation where huge question marks over exactly what happened and what can now be proven.
And in regards to the witnesses or any evidence, we know that the two people involved in this situation are now dead, and there is only one person still living that knows exactly, allegedly, what happened.
Yeah, exactly. And they can rely on some forensic evidence, but that was obviously very significantly damaged because of the fire and the forensic, what I would class as countermeasures that Greg Lynn took. He's a very intelligent man, ex-Jetstar pilot. So he went to quite extreme lengths to cover his tracks and destroy that evidence. So we had ballistic evidence that was quite heavily questioned as well, even by the Crown questioned their own ballistics evidence in that case.
And you mentioned before, Xanthe, the 59-year-old has always maintained that the elderly campers' deaths were tragic accidents. How critical is that in this new trial moving forward?
That is critical because the ballistics expert kind of admitted that Greg Lynn's account of kind of how it happened fitted with the evidence that he presented or that he found. And that was, I think, one of the big factors which led to this appeal being allowed to go forward in the retrial because, that evidence, the fact that he did say that and that he didn't get to speak to that again and that was presented and challenged by the Crown, but he wasn't allowed to defend it, then I think that's one of the big problems because if the ballistics evidence did match Greg Lynn's account, then you could reach the conclusion that this was a terrible accident. So that was kind of removed from the jury's potential outcome, I guess you could say. So yeah, I just don't know. My brain is kind of melting over this, to be honest, trying to figure out legally what way they might go, given the restrictions that are now in place. It's an incredibly difficult position for the Crown, but ultimately we're talking alleged murder. And so they kind of have to go forward. They can't just decide to not retry. But if they go forward, it really is going to be an incredibly difficult process and very complex for them.
So what happens from here, Xanthe? As we know, a monumental decision over the last couple of days. We know a new trial has been set at this stage. What happens from here?
So now when I'm kind of crystal balling, I imagine the Crown will be looking at exactly what evidence they think that they can now use from the original, because we're not probably looking at new evidence at this stage. It's really reviewing the evidence and how it was presented from the last trial. That's the problem. So they will be looking at that thinking, well, what can we include in our brief of evidence? And then there will be a committal hearing and ultimately a judge will decide what evidence can be put before a jury or at least into the trial if they go judge alone. That's another big question because can they find a jury that doesn't already have an opinion? Would it be prejudicial to do a jury trial? Again, another decision that needs to be made. And so the committal will happen, evidence will be included or excluded, and then we will go forward to trial. But we're talking months and months of work before that happens.
Certainly a fascinating week. We really appreciate your analysis. As always, thanks, Xanthe.
Thanks, Tash.
That was criminologist Xanthe Mallett. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. And we would like to send our sincere condolences to the family and friends of foreign affairs expert Dr. Keith Suter, who has sadly passed away at the age of 77. Keith was a well-known and well-respected international commentator who was a regular guest on The Briefing. He will be sorely missed, and our thoughts are with his loved ones. We'll be back tomorrow with the weekend briefing, and on tomorrow's episode, Antoinette is joined by Olympic swimming gold medalist Michael Klim.
It wasn't really until 2 or 3 years into this journey that I started realizing that my perspective is, so important. If I look at it as, being the victim and I've been hard done by, I'm never going to actually move forward. And, I can actually do some good out in the community by utilizing my profile and spreading the message of the journey that I've had.
And we'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. See you next time.